Welcome to She Said Homestead, the podcast that explores homesteading from a range of perspectives. We're Sage and Mickayla, two homesteaders, each with unique experiences, properties, and future goals for our homesteads. We're discussing various homesteading topics, sharing our personal experiences as women working full-time who are managing homesteads as well, and shining a light on the stories of other inspiring homesteaders.
Before we dive in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy our podcast, please consider leaving a review. It really helps us grow and share these homesteading stories with even more people.
Hey there, guys. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Mickayla from Calico Cow Acres.
And I'm Sage from Terra Nova Acres, and we both have homesteads in Western North Carolina.
Just before we get into this, I'm going to put a disclaimer because there's going to be noise in the background. Hopefully I can hear myself think through this, but Taylor is in the basement working on a project and it is loud. So I apologize in advance, but it might just be a thing. So note that before you listen.
I think it goes great with today's theme, which is work, homestead, life balance. And, you know, you got to find a little bit of give and a little bit of take with all of it. And perfect example.
Yeah, you guys all have to give a little by listening to Taylor Saw things. Before we get into talking about that, though, what did you do this week, Sage?
Oh, gosh. So when we're recording this, Christmas was this last week. And so that was obviously a big part of it. And when it's Christmas, I get to bake like a maniac, and no one thinks it's weird because I can just give the food away as gifts. And I just got my oven replaced because the other one was not working. So I got to make eclair pastry, choux pastry, for the first time in like 3 years. And that's something that my grandmother used to make. She taught me how to make it. So that was actually exciting for me. I got to make eclairs, I made some pizzelles, I made some bread, and normally I do more than that, but that's all I did. Quote unquote, that's all I did. But Christmas baking made my heart happy. I kind of needed that, and so that felt good. My dad was here for a little bit, stayed for Christmas and to help around the homestead. But just little tasks mostly. But I mean, it was a lot of odds and ends projects. Like I had been wanting to do some fencing maintenance and kind of change the fence perimeter to give the sheep access to this weird cove that was fenced off before for some reason. Also unpacked the greenhouse and got that started like 1%. So not really, but it's still something. And then ordered some things for spring. As I've been clearing, working on taking stuff down, I'm becoming more and more aware of like how visible I am to my neighbors and how visible my neighbors are to me. And so I ordered some red cedar. I think it's red cedar to put around the property. And they're tiny, but if you buy them in bulk in the winter, you can get a really good deal on them. So I ordered that. I ordered some more willow cuttings to keep working on my living fence that will take like 10 years to grow in. But in 10 years, it's going to look great probably right when I move out. So little weird things like that. I also ordered some pasture seed. But really, the big thing that happened this week and what's taken most of my time and attention is sheep pregnancy drama. So I have 4 sheep. One of them is a ram, and then 3 of them are females. They're ewes. The ram has been with them since last year, and they probably got bred August or September. 2 of them, now that I look at them, are very visibly and clearly pregnant. One of them, the remaining ewe, is probably pregnant. She just hasn't like popped yet. And in my head, I was thinking that I wouldn't have lambs. They wouldn't be lambing until like maybe early April, the earliest. I'm now realizing that I'm probably very wrong about that. I think the first one will lamb for sure sometime in the next 6 weeks, which would be mid-February at the latest, but probably more like I'll probably see lambs in January. But the drama with it was that I noticed one of my sheep had something called an intermittent prolapse, where it's part of the body that's supposed to be on the inside is a little bit on the outside. And I had the equipment to deal with it, but in all of that, that's how I realized, like, oh, you guys are a lot more pregnant than I thought you were, because there are certain factors that can predispose them to that. One of them is having multiple lambs in gestation. Another one is steep slopes, which I live literally on the side of a mountain. I live on a steep slope, and so when they're laying down, they lay so that their head is uphill. That means that their body is downhill, and if she has a really heavy womb because she's got 2 or 3 lambs in there, it's just pushing on her organs and straining her. So she's healthy, she's okay. I placed a retainer, I took it out, she's doing great, but there's a chance that her body might be sort of nixing that pregnancy, and then I probably won't be able to breed her in subsequent years, so I'll have to figure out sheep birth control. Like, it's a whole thing that I've been dealing with, and I've just kind of been up in the pasture staring at sheep butts to be able to tell what's going on. So yeah, lots of steep learning curve, lots of unexpected sheep maintenance, and just fun time all around.
That's another good homestead never did I ever story.
It
And
really is, yeah.
we're supposed to get like super cold weather in the next few weeks, so it'll probably happen during then that you're gonna get your first lambs to deal with, right?
100%. But I'm also prepared for that, so.
That just reminds me that I've been wanting to say this in the last few episodes, but if you are listening to this and you have homestead, never did I ever expect to deal with this, or funny or gross stories that you can share with us from your homesteading experience, we want to start reading a couple listener stories at the end of each episode. So if you have them, do us a favor and please email them to us. They can be anything that you want. We are not picky, and even if they're gross, we'll read them, and we'll probably read them on here because that's even more fun. I just wanted to throw that in there.
All right, what about you? What did you get up to this week?
Like you said, it's been Christmas week, so I've been off of work this week, and I've been eating entirely too many cookies and watching so many movies. We watched Lord of the Rings for the first... I watched it for the first time. Taylor's seen it before, but that's been taking up a huge chunk of our time. We've been just relaxing, doing Christmas, baking cookies, making other Christmas treats like granola and whatnot, because I have gifts that I want to give to like neighbors and friends still. We went thrifting. We went to the antique store that we like to go to in Hendersonville and spent like 4 hours there just looking at things. I cleaned my house back up, which was nice. It's like not a mess in here anymore. I haven't touched my shelves. Haven't finished painting them yet. Because I know you all are anxiously awaiting the update on that. They're still not done. And I'm going to wait 2 more weeks before I make myself work on them again because I need a break from them. We filmed a video today, just like a sit-down Q&A. I've been editing our 2-year Homestead Anniversary 2024 recap video, which is, I'm 2 minutes into editing it. Like, I've spent hours working on it, and it's 2 minutes done. And today we got out to the garden because it's been like super rainy this week, but today was like 62 and sunny. So we got out and we moved some of our trees down to the orchard that we're going to put in the ground soon once Taylor's done with his clearing in that area. We started to get things kind of set up for the greenhouse area. He's going to chop that tree down in the middle of our garden because it's a Bradford pear before we try and put the greenhouse up. So we got that stuff out of the way. We moved our roosters up to the garden in garden beds so that they're like prepping garden beds for us. I weed whacked the whole garden today. It felt really nice to be outside and doing things and in the sun. It was nice, and it wasn't like too hot or anything. So just spent a lot of time out in the garden today. And then I got 8 inches cut off of my hair this week. This is the first time I've had a haircut in a year and a half, so it was time.
Do you feel like a new person with shorter hair? Or do you just feel like nothing really changed? Because 8 inches is a lot. If I cut off 8 inches, I would look totally different.
You can't tell on video right now that I even got my hair cut. I I feel like it looks different in person, but it feels more different than it looks, I think. As soon as I even get like a couple inches cut off or like just a trim, I can feel my hair, like it feels lighter. I don't know if other people experience that because I just have so much hair. My hair is really, really thick that even just trimming off the ends, my hair like lifts up and it's like lighter. But I get it thinned a lot too whenever I get my hair cut because it is so thick and it's like heavy and it gives me headaches because it's so heavy. I can feel it. It feels like I can feel air on the underside of my head for the first time in like 6 months because my hair gets so thick that it literally like almost starts getting dreads no matter how much I brush it. So it feels like there's fresh air under my head for the first time in like a long, long time, which is really nice. And I don't have to wash my hair in 3 parts now.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. Wow. But that's
literally
just a fundamentally different life experience.
I literally have to lift up this part of my hair, which is like the top part of my hair is probably as much hair as everybody else has. Just this. And then I wash that, and then I wash the middle, and then I have to lift that up and clip it up in the shower and wash the very bottom, or else the soap can't reach all of it because it's so thick. It's annoying. Okay, I have a question for you. So we kind of talked about this recently in one of our episodes. But I always, like the week of Christmas, I usually have it off of work or school or whatever I've lived through. And I start to think about like the planning for the next year and like goals I want to accomplish. And I've really been thinking about, you know, what is realistic or potentially realistic stuff that we're going to get done this year, especially in the next 2 months before garden season. And I'm curious if that's kind of been in the like the headspace you've been in as well.
The headspace that I've been in has been mostly like, wow, I can't believe I'm still burnt out. And then just slight panic for I know how quickly this is all gonna go by. And I have my handful of projects that I would really like to get done so that I can push them forward in spring and do other things like plant fruit trees and berry bushes and all that stuff. And if I don't get certain things done in the winter, then like that gets pushed off for a whole year. So, I mean, yes, I'm in a planning headspace, but it's also much more worried and stressed and frenzied than just planning, if that makes sense.
I'm the same way this year. Usually I'm excited about my planning. This year I'm dreading it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to start seeds in 3 weeks. Some of them will be inside, so it doesn't matter, but I'm like, okay, I was planning to have the greenhouse up so I can start some flowers and onions and whatnot outside in the greenhouse. And now Taylor has to make another impromptu trip to Michigan in 2 weeks. And that was the weekend I was planning to do that. So now it's going to get pushed off another week. And we have a brand deal that relates to gardening stuff that we have to do at the end of January, which also kind of requires me to have the greenhouse ready. So I've also been a little bit panicky. And also we start like direct sown things in February. Like we do potatoes and peas in February. So I'm like, oh, it's so close. It's only a month away.
I know. Yeah, feeling like we've just kind of settled from last year and you're like, "Oh, I have time." And then you get to this place and you're like, "I have no time." It's already here. It's what it feels like, at least.
Yeah, I really wanted to take this like weekish that I have off and really rest because I feel like both of us have been so burnt out since I want to say the hurricane, but I feel like it's just like summer and spring happened before that. For like the year, we've just both been, there's not really been any rest. And I've been really feeling that since really Thanksgiving. It got really bad like early December. And so I'm like, I just want to rest. And my brain is like, you need to start doing things again. But my body's not quite ready. It's just a lot. I'm like, I have to go back to work this week, and adding that whole scenario back into the chaos of life, not looking forward to it. So yeah, I've been pondering this episode topic this week, thinking about this. And I think I've come to a conclusion about my work, life, and homestead balance. Do you have a conclusion for that for yourself? Like, do you feel like you have a good balance? I need to hear your answer
I
first.
I think balance is entirely the wrong word, because at least when I hear that, and maybe that's because I take things too literally sometimes, but when I hear work-life-homestead balance, I think, okay, there is a version that exists out there where I can balance them all equally, and there is a way to do it that is not stressed out and that is not last minute panicking about all this stuff, that is not neglecting the laundry and the dishes, that is not neglecting the garden and letting it get weedy. But I don't think that version realistically exists. How do you feel about that?
I feel like I'm good at two of these things at once, and it's always a rotating thing. And this is kind of a term we've made up, right? Like work-life balance is what you're usually going to hear, but we also have the added homesteading thing, as well as other things on top of it. Some people have work, personal life, and then like their kids on top of it. Some people have multiple jobs, so it's work life, you know? So like our version of that is work life homestead balance. And I feel like I can definitely do two of these things well at a time. And it's just constantly rotating what those two things are. I can be very present with work during the week, and then I can get off work, make dinner, get the house cleaned up, and spend the evening with Taylor. That's a pretty good work-life balance. I can go to bed at a decent time and get good sleep, wake up fine the next day. Or I can focus on work during the week or during a weekday, get done with work, go out to the garden and do a project, or do a project inside that's homestead related, work on that until 11 p.m., then panic because I haven't had dinner yet and I forgot to eat, and also Taylor is working on something and he also forgot to eat, and then we're going to bed at 1 a.m. because we still had to wrap up other stuff. So that's a work homestead balance, but life gets tossed out the window. One of them that's always included has to be work, because that's not really something that you can sacrifice, I guess. So it's really just a matter for me of choosing what things I want to sacrifice on any given day, on like a daily basis.
Yeah, in my experience for my own life, I also feel like it's a calculated give and take. I am constantly borrowing from one area and giving to another. And I also feel the same about work. Like I can't just slack at work and borrow from that, because that's way too risky. Like I would so much rather forget to eat dinner but keep in good standing with my bi-weekly paycheck so I can pay the mortgage. Yeah. Work is one that just doesn't really ever give in my life either.
So yeah, I think a better term for them, at least in my mind, is like integration or sacrifice, like choosing how you're going to make them work together and choosing what things have to fall off, because there's always going to be something that doesn't get done. And it's unfortunate that a lot of the times, and it's not just us, like a lot of the times taking care of yourself is the thing that has to fall off, because you're taking care of other beings that rely on you, and you have to make sure those things get done, or you are trying to pay your bills.
So, on a regular basis, when you're trying to, I guess, balance these as best as you can, what does your daily and even weekly routine look like?
I think recently this has gotten a lot easier and a lot more streamlined and more consistent, I would say. I wouldn't say it's actually like easy, but it's definitely easier than it has been in the past, because I feel like I can actually relax in my house now. Like I can turn myself off in my house. I'm not just anxious looking at the amount of work that needs to be done in here. So I work 9 to 5 every day. And for those hours, Monday through Friday, I'm like online, but usually in the mornings is when I have to do my homestead chores. I try not to leave stuff for myself to do after work. If there are things that need to get done after work, that's usually something that falls on Taylor, because he will get home and like he's ready to be home and he will like have the energy to do things, whereas like I'm home all day. And so I try and get the stuff done that I need to get done in the morning before work, and then after work I can either deal with dinner, because I'm usually the one making dinner, or I can go do whatever specific project I want to work on, because I've always got this running list of homestead related projects that aren't just daily life tasks. So like in the morning, I'm feeding the birds, watering the birds, making sure that they're good to go out there and I don't need to deal with them later. I'm starting laundry, I'm doing dishes, unloading the dishwasher, anything like that. I don't do any like cleaning or whatever in the mornings. It's just maintenance, like keep it at a level that's semi-acceptable. In the evening, it will be, like I said, like a more specific project. And then on the weekends, we do bigger projects, stuff that we need to work on together. I've tried to switch to only filming on weekends if I can, or when I have days off, because it's really dark right now and filming in the dark isn't fun. And we're not doing a lot of outside projects because it's dark out whenever we're done with work. And that kind of shifts come summer. So weekends are for big projects, filming, editing things, meal prep. And it all just kind of gets thrown together. And it's a combination of whenever I can find 5 minutes to do the little things like tossing laundry in the washer and then remembering to switch it in the dryer, and like whenever it can get done. But it's also a matter of what I feel like doing, because I'm going to be a lot more productive if I'm doing something that I feel like doing versus something that I'm forcing myself to do. So planning is a huge factor in that. Like I always have my running to-do list on the project management software that we use for the podcast. Like I have my own lists and categories, and if I didn't have that, nothing would ever get done. I haven't looked at this week and nothing has gotten done. So it's chaos. I would say that like there's no rhyme or reason. It's just whatever we can manage. So do you feel like you have some sort of balance down with that, or do you think that you have to kind of just work with what you've got, sort of like I do?
I feel like I have a version of balance, but again, I mean, I feel like balance is a more gracious word than what it really is. But I have a routine with it for sure. And so mornings, wake up, feed the indoor pets, make my coffee, feed the outdoor pets / livestock, and then come in and work. I also work more or less 9 to 5. I have a little bit more freedom. It's not like I have to clock in right at 9 and then clock out right at 5. If I have something that happens and I need to clock in at 9:30 and then work until 5:30 to make sure I still get my hours, like I can do that. But I have to be generally available during those business hours. I can't just disappear until noon and then be like, "Hey, popping in." And so more or less I work sometime between 8:30 and 6, get my 8 hours in. And when it's colder out, when the days are shorter, there's really not a whole lot that I can get done after work. There's just not. I'll probably go collect eggs, bring some more hay to the sheep, give them their nightly alfalfa, and that's pretty much it. But in the summer, it stays light until like 9. So I have sometimes like 4 hours. And so when there's more to be done on the homestead, there's usually more light to get it done, which is nice. It generally ends up being exhausting. But I do the same thing where the really big projects I save for the weekends, because even though it might be physically possible to cram it into that time, that doesn't mean that it's the smart move to do, because if I'm demanding perfect performance out of myself from the moment that I wake up to the moment that I fall asleep, I'm just setting myself up to fail, because I'm not a perfect person and I'm not going to have a flawless day. And yeah, I can also stay productive from waking up until falling asleep and still end up with a messy house. It's not like I'm getting everything that I quote unquote should be getting done. It's not like I'm getting it all done in a day, but my routine is also just doing what I can.
So do you feel like you're better at the life section of this balance in the wintertime than in the summertime when there's less hours, but there's also less to do? Like, are you feeding yourself better, like remembering to eat and clean and whatnot in the winter?
I think I'm always bad at the life section of this list. I feel like I'm a little bit better, like maybe like 5% better at it in the winter. And when I'm looking at that season coming up, I'm like, I'm excited, right? Because I get all these expectations in my mind of like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna be able to do things like cook some like really healthy, really nutritious meals and take my time and enjoy it and all this stuff. And then I get to that phase and I'm like, oh, right, this is when I crash and burn because I need to rest really hard in winter, and it just doesn't doesn't happen. I end up just moving so slow at everything that even though there's still 24 hours in a day, I get a fraction of the things done, and that's okay, right? It's all, I don't want to fight against what my body is doing because there's a reason it's doing it. I want to flow with it. I want to trust it. But man, sometimes it's hard to not feel like you should always be doing better at it, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that feeling and that urge is definitely something that's kind of ingrained in you as a child, and then just throughout life, just the way that our society works, like you're always expected to do more and you should be doing more. Like doing good work and doing, like, being productive, all that gets you is more work in almost every scenario, at least in my mind. Like whether that's at your job being productive, you're like, there, everyone says congratulations, here's the next thing that you can work on. Or in my own brain of congratulations, I completed this project, let's start the next one because there are 500. Something else that I've kind of noticed over the last couple of years, especially with like the homestead things, is how much the homestead and life categories of this kind of meld together for me, where those are almost just one thing. And that's how it should be, right? Like this is like the lifestyle we want to be living, so it's life. And how much those tasks regulate me and make me happy to do so. Like they're almost, even if they're really hard work, it's almost restful, at least mentally for me. Like I can clock off of my computer after staring at the screen for 8+ hours straight, go outside and do something in the garden that's like physically difficult for my body and completely enjoy it and not feel like I'm stressed out about it or it's hard. Like I'm enjoying the hard work of it because, one, I'm recharging my social battery because nobody's talking to me. And it reduces my stress because my mind is allowed to wander, but also sort of focus on whatever I'm doing. And I'm not thinking about like all the things that make me anxious elsewhere in the world or at work or, other stuff.
And something that is not necessarily unique to us, but maybe is a little abnormal compared to most people, is that we don't really set aside portions of our life for, social activities in the way that a lot of people do, and that's in very large part because we're just very introverted people, and that's not really something that we necessarily seek out. That's something that we usually try to avoid. Sounds really terrible. I bet to a lot of people, but that's how we work. And so whereas most people would maybe dedicate more of their time to outings with friends, that's just not part of our weekly life. And so that does help us set aside more time to do, homesteading tasks and things like that. But it doesn't feel like a sacrifice because it's just a rhythm that we enjoy. And I promise you guys, we get out sometimes.
Just
On
to see
occasion,
each
we leave
other.
the homestead. Yeah, mostly to see other homesteaders or do homesteading things, but still.
Do you think that having your homestead and not being able to like go on trips or go out and socialize more has affected your relationships with friends at all or family?
I don't think it's the homestead that's affected that. I think it's my natural proclivities. The same proclivity that attracted me to homesteading is the same proclivity that pushes me away from doing things like driving 4 hours to go see family or, having a huge circle of friends, which is just never going to be a thing for me. For the same reason that I like homesteading is why I dislike those things. So they're related, but it's not the homestead's fault, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair. We have like a really big friend group in Metro Detroit, I would say, but I think that since we live 12 hours from everyone else that we like are friends with, besides the few people we've met and become friends with down here, I think that like that actually helps us where we can be focused on our projects and not feel guilty about not socializing as much because none of those other people are doing homestead things. As much as I like miss them and love being able to see them when we do get to see them, maybe once a year, if they lived near us, we would get significantly less stuff done. But I feel like we have a really good core group of people that I've started to like, we see really often now. Even if that's like in my mind, often is like a handful of times a year we get together. Like with Red and Steven, Taylor and Steven are really good friends now. And it's kind of branched off a little bit where like he hung out with them yesterday while I stayed here and just like did my own thing around the house. He did car things with them and we'll get together with them to watch drifting. And that's just like an evening a few times a year. And then we'll do our little like gingerbread party and stuff. And, it's not like a weekly thing that we see each other than sitting on the podcast, which I enjoy because I don't have to think about getting dressed and driving an hour. And, as much as that's fun, like trying to maintain that every week, it's not going to happen. So this kind of socialization is something that's doable for us, which I think that's perfectly fine. I do think that working from home, at least in my case, is something that's absolutely necessary for this whole balance to work. Because Taylor works away from home, and that would mean that if we both worked out of the house, nobody would be here to make sure our animals were okay during the day, let alone like feed our pets, because the cats themselves eat multiple times a day because they all have special diets. So it started out with that, but I very much believe that like the way I've built my life around working from home, I could never go work in an office. Like again, I don't think that I could make that work with the animals. Commuting sounds like my absolute worst nightmare, like in any way, shape, or form, even if it's like 15 minutes. That just sounds so stressful to me. Being perceived all day and having to wear like clothes that are acceptable for society in an office, that sounds horrible. There are a lot of things that happen during the day around here where, thankfully not on a regular basis, but like sometimes stuff happens where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm panicking because my duck is acting weird. I'm like, I need to keep an eye on her. Or the chicken got out and I need to get her back in 16 times today because she found a hole in the fence that she can get through and she wants to be out in the garden and not in the fence. And what if I wasn't here? Then we'd have a real like the chicken crossed the road scenario. And that's just not fun to deal with when you have a 15, 35, 50 hour and a half long commute. Like Taylor has a 45-minute commute. I cannot imagine if I worked that far away.
I think I could make it work. It'd be more difficult, and it would definitely open up the animals to situations where I wouldn't be home and wouldn't be able to keep an eye on them or intervene if something happened. I think I could manage it though. I far prefer working from home, and I can do things like, instead of take a water cooler break, I can go walk in the garden. Honestly, for me, it's not just about the homesteading stuff, like taking the time to commute, because I used to do that. Actually, the first I'll call it real job. I worked in food service before I got an actual job in my field of study that I went to college for. But my first career job, there we go. I was commuting more than an hour each way. So that's over 2 hours out of every day, which is a lot, especially when you're sitting in Denver traffic. Oh my God. No, thank you. And I've worked from home since 2020. So going on really almost 5 years now. I can't imagine sacrificing that much of my day to commuting. I can't imagine having to get ready, office professional ready every single morning. I can get ready enough to be on video meetings. That's fine. Like 3 times a week. It's very different than sitting in an office for 8 times 5, 40. There we go. 40 hours a week. But I'm just honestly more productive. If I'm in an office, I'm distracted by all of the social things that I guess a lot of people enjoy, but I don't. I don't like that social aspect. I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm here to do my job, and then I want to leave because I have my life outside of work, and I used to be the person that tried to make work their life, and I just have no interest in doing that anymore. And sometimes that can come off as rude or cold to the people that you work with. And I'm not doing it on purpose.
I think that I would be, if I worked like in an office or something, I would be just stressed out and anxious about something going wrong here throughout the day. Like, I don't think I would be able to focus, not even taking into consideration all of the distractions in an office. I've never been able to work around other people well. Like, I work so much better at home. In college, we had studio is what they call it, where it's like 5-hour blocks of time. And those are like, it's class hours, but you're required to go sit and work on your architectural design studio projects, like your main projects for the semester, during those hours. And you have to sit in there and be with everyone else. And I never got anything done. This is a main reason that I pulled all-nighters all of the time, because I would get home from that and then I would start my work because I couldn't focus while everything else was happening. So the distractions overall of an office environment, plus the added stress of knowing that my animals are here and anything could be happening, it sounds like the worst possible situation for me. So I'm like very glad. I think that the only semblance of a work-life homesteading balance for me comes from the fact that I'm able to work from home. If that were the case, I don't think that I could do nearly as much homesteading as we're doing here.
I fully agree with that. I think my capacity would be greatly reduced. Part of that being the commute time, but a lot of that also being just mental capacity. Because if I had to sit in an office and do all of that, I would have no mental energy to take on all of those things, even if I have physical energy.
Yeah, and social capacity too. Like, I would have no energy at the end of the day for anything if I had to socialize in person for 40 hours a week. I don't think that I'd have the energy to do a single project after work. Or, I understand why it's hard for people to make dinner after work, because I would just feel so drained. Okay, so we've kind of talked about the work side of things for the last little bit, but what are the ways that you have set up your homestead infrastructure and systems and your routine to fit that tug of war between work and life and all of the homestead things?
Yeah, so something that's important to me, because I have all these other things to balance, is choosing animals and systems that can be, to some degree, independent and for a short period of time self-sustaining. So, for example, I have a lot of hesitations with cows, but one of my hesitations with cows is I feel like they kind of just need more attention. Like, you kind of just got to be around and noticing if they need something. Sheep, at least in my perception, are a little bit better, kind of like left more to their own devices. I'm not worried that they've like been mischievous and gotten into something. Same thing with goats. Like, goats have a reputation for getting out of fences, and that has scared me away from trying them. And again, with that one too, there's other reasons that I just don't want them. But I don't want an animal that I feel like needs my relatively constant supervision. That would just never work for me. I've done things like made sure my perimeter fence is really solid. Is it perfect? No. It's never going to be perfect no matter how much time and money I throw at it, but it gives me peace of mind to know, like, hey, I'm pretty confident that nothing's breaking into or out of that fence, and I don't have to worry about if the sheep have gotten out and are eating my garden or whatever. I've set up the infrastructure so that for the block of time, the majority of the day, everybody has what they need. Everybody can do their own thing until I can check in on them, maybe 24 hours later. And then that also goes back to having to do the bigger projects on the weekends. It's just never, it's never going to work for me to try to take on, especially like construction projects. I'm not going to tinker with the greenhouse for 2 hours after work. I'm going to set aside my block of time and just accept that with how my life works, it might take a lot longer to get bigger projects like that done. Whereas if I didn't have a 9 to 5 job, yeah, I could knock that out and count on getting it done in a week. But because I don't have that, I'm like, I don't know, it might take me 3 months. And that's okay. It's recognizing what's realistic and setting expectations. Going into even just the pace of homesteading.
I think that's something that is underestimated when people get into homesteading, is that sometimes there are seasons for projects, winter being the construction season for those, at least down here. And sometimes a project's going to take you like a whole month of weekends to get done, like one thing. And you're going to be working on it for all day Saturday, every weekend for 4, 5, 6 weeks. And it's frustrating because along with that is like other things that you need to get done as far as projects go. Maybe you're working on one and then you're trying to start another one because they all need to get done before a certain date, or you're going to have to wait until next year to do it. Like we kind of mentioned earlier with like, you mentioned this in a recent episode too, where you're like, okay, I'm going to try and get the high tunnel up, but if it doesn't happen, it's going to happen sometime in the next year, maybe. Yeah, I think that's severely underestimated, where, and even I do it. It's like, I get very ambitious, and I've really, like, this year started to come to terms with, like, okay, it's okay for things to take a little bit longer. It's okay if you're not getting all of the projects done, because they'll get done eventually. There's always going to be more that need to be done. And, like, leaning into being able to rest a little bit more and just, like, not letting my body have so much of a toll taken on it, like, giving myself a little bit of breathing room. We kind of have a different version of the things you were saying, where, like, we've set up our systems to be able to run a certain level without our intervention, where, like, when it's not 17 degrees overnight, I don't have to worry about water. We have a solution for that, but it has been an issue the last couple of weeks when it's been cold. I have a massive chicken and duck run so that I don't have to feel bad about leaving them in if we're not home. Like, they still have plenty of space to do their thing and they're not crowded if we're gone for the day. Or even if I needed to keep them locked in so that I can sit on a meeting and not worry about my ducks walking up into the road. The ducks, I let them free range most of the time because if they are going up there, I could hear them because they're loud, and I know that I need to run out there really quick and go put them in. Their coop and run set up in an area where I can fence off the entire garden space, and we're going to be able to give them paddocks throughout the year eventually and not have to worry about moving an entire structure. I just have to move 1 or 2 nets once a month or so, which will be really nice. That's something that's in the plans. It's not something we've done yet. Going back to being patient about things, we have strategically put off getting goats because the amount of infrastructure that we need to build and think about and pay for kind of outweighs their benefits right now, and we know we're not really ready to take on the time commitment for taking care of them and making sure that like they're good to go and they'll be happy and healthy and thrive on our property. Like that needs to wait a little bit longer. So they're a little bit higher maintenance animals, and we just have to like be patient and make sure the timing's right for that. And then like you said, projects, like the bigger projects on the weekends, like we can usually get a portion of something done on weeknights, but a lot of the times it's like these shelves I'll paint for an hour or two after work. Like I'm sitting here painting stuff and then I have to pause and make dinner, and then it's 9 p.m. and like we'll sit and eat dinner and watch a little bit TV while we're eating dinner. I clean up the kitchen and I have to go to bed because something else that I've realized in the last year is that annoyingly, very, very annoyingly, my body does best on 10 hours of sleep. So that's nearly impossible, but I do try and shoot for that.
Man, 10 hours of sleep. Okay, I also feel like my body does better with like 8.5, 9, but 10 hours. Okay, so if you went to bed at 10 p.m., then you would wake up at 8. That's not too crazy. I mean, difficult to set aside that much time for sure, but
That's ideal.
Those seem like reasonable sleeping hours.
Yeah, I would say it's 9 to 10 hours, but like if I just, and maybe it's just a winter thing, but on the weekends, if I'm just letting myself sleep until I wake up and I'm not setting an alarm, which I've been trying to like play around with on the weekends and this past week being off, I'm waking up with 10 hours of sleep. And it could just be a winter thing because I feel like in the summer I'll wake up more towards like 8.5, 9 hours, but in the winter I've noticed lately it's like closer to 10, which is ridiculous, but my body is just like it needs more rest right now, and I've been trying to honor that, which is it's like a mental thing. I'm like, I know my body needs it, but it's annoying to me. Like, can you just not? Can we just do more things? Why are we sleeping this much? And we still feel tired. I don't get it. I also feel like that's more of a like a cycle thing. Like the women's bodies work on more of a monthly cycle than a daily cycle. And I think that changes throughout the month for me for sure.
Oh, yeah. I notice for sure when I have my good week, I'm like, man, especially if I'm in a routine where I'm going to the gym, which I'm not right now, but I'm like, oh my God, that workout that was so hard last week was like easy peasy. And then you just know it's all downhill from there and you're like, damn it.
Yeah. I feel like that is something that really needs to be said during this episode. That like work-life homestead balance is definitely like a roller coaster throughout the month, depending on my hormones.
Yeah, and to be clear, because I feel like that gets misconstrued so often whenever the conversation of women and hormones comes up, because people hear that, and I feel like so often they just hear women are irrational, emotional creatures, and that's not at all what we are trying to say. Men have hormonal cycles too. They're on a 24-hour basis. Women have hormonal cycles. They're on a monthly basis. And so we're all human. We are, fun fact, all equally emotionally capable, which I feel like is also something that gets misconstrued. Yeah, and it's just society tends to be built around not what is convenient for women. And so it comes up especially when you feel like you're a fish trying to swim upstream, even though you're just trying to take care of yourself. It conflicts with life expectations.
So on top of the work, the life, the homestead, at least for us, there's another factor of consideration when talking about like integrating all of these things together and balance and just existing as humans. And it's not something we have explicitly really like discussed before, but it's something that we've probably hinted at and just brushed off. But for this discussion in particular, I feel like we need to talk about this thing. I don't know.
This thing.
This
daunting thing.
This big scary
No,
thing.
It's true. I mean, we joke sometimes, that we're the same kind of weird, and we'll bring up the word neurodivergent on occasion, but we don't ever really touch it any farther than that. And we have not talked about what that means for how we process things or how that affects our overall lives. And there are multiple labels that fall under the umbrella of neurodivergence, but something that becomes apparent when you realize that you're neurodivergent, regardless of what that label or combination of labels is that sort of aha moment of you've been living life on hard mode, at least compared to the normal, or the opposite of neurodivergent would be neurotypical, compared to the neurotypical experience. And it's honestly something that I haven't wanted to talk about and that I don't talk about because I honestly don't think people would believe me when I describe my internal experience, especially because labels like ADHD and autism and CPTSD are thrown around more and more often, and you kind of can sometimes get the gut reaction from people, oh, well, everybody thinks they have ADHD these days. And I have so many thoughts on that I'm not going to get into, but there is nothing more invalidating than having to debate and justify your own personal internal experience to someone who has never and will never live in your head. And so I honestly don't usually go there. But when you're capable of doing the normal things, whether that's getting good grades or holding down a job or just in general pretending that you can keep up with the neurotypicals and speak their language, something we call masking. When people don't see you struggle with it, they assume that it isn't difficult for you when that could not be farther from the truth. And of course, I can't speak for everyone. I have no desire to speak for everyone, but in the conversations that I've had with so many other people who identify as neurodivergent, something that consistently comes up and that we've all had in common, and honestly find validation in sharing between each other, is just that the basic life things drain us. And when I say it drains us, I don't mean, oh, I'm tired after work. I mean, I can't make food for myself because I used every single ounce of my executive functioning to make small talk and monitor my facial expressions and control my body language and just adjust every single thing that I do to mask so that other people don't think I'm rude or combative or just plain off-putting, just plain unsettling. The things that neurotypical people do by habit and that they can accomplish with minimal mental effort almost take everything that we have. And I am so sincere when I say I am not exaggerating that. And that's my baseline experience. I am always stressed. I am always some degree of exhausted, and life always feels at least slightly unmanageable to me. Ultimately, everything is relative and it's all about perspective. So taking on something like homesteading is actually significantly easier for me than something like working an 8-hour workday at a computer, just because of how my brain works. It's not that homesteading isn't objectively challenging. It's that I feel like I'm running a metaphorical marathon every day in a world that is just truly not designed for me, and homesteading is my break from running that marathon. I will do backbreaking physical labor all day while multitasking and unraveling 8 different mental puzzles that need solving in my head, and that is my escape from something that a neurotypical might find really easy, like going to work. I, for a long time, actually struggled pretty significantly with thinking that I was just lazy or defective or any number of other descriptors that you could put to that. But I can now recognize and accept that I am fundamentally different and that my brain is wired fundamentally differently from a lot of other people. And oftentimes when I talk about, or we talk about how challenging homesteading is, we're not actually talking about the physical homesteading tasks a lot of the time. What we're talking about is the more mundane stuff, the social relationships, the everyday routine life tasks that we need to do outside of homesteading in order to keep ourselves alive and some degree of functioning, contributing members of society. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't understand or recognize how common that experience is, because when you're different, because when you fall under that neurodivergent umbrella, you're taught to find a way to blend in. And it brings to mind the quote that if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. And a lot of us are fish who are spending our lives trying to climb trees because birds built society in the treetops. And the fish are afraid to admit that they can't fly, which leaves the birds just straight up confused why the trees would be such a barrier, and each have fundamentally different strengths, but society was only built to accommodate one.
Okay, we need to talk about some of the things that you just said because there was a lot in there. I want to relate some of that back to some of the stuff we've talked about in this episode just to give like specific examples to people. Something that like you guys listening don't see is the fact that between sentences, or sometimes just partially through a thought and like a half sentence, we are pausing and like looking back at our notes or saying and having to come up with the rest of our thought because like our brains just don't work the way where we can have like a conversation without pausing and thinking about things. Like it's not happening that quickly, and a lot of that gets cut out of this because that's not something that somebody who has a normal conversation, a neurotypical conversation, has to worry about. Like we have guests on and they can just talk and we're always like, wow, this is amazing, you're so good at talking, and we have to give a disclaimer every time we have a guest on saying we're gonna pause in the middle of a sentence, don't let it confuse you. If there's an awkward silence, it's just us buffering. Like it's okay, we're not trying to be awkward, it's gonna be awkward though. Where you were talking about like homesteading not being the hard thing, it's the other stuff where like the 8-hour workday is the hard thing. We had Lindsay on and she mentioned that, and I think she mentioned in the episode that she has some form of neurodivergence, and like that's why her working for herself and working on the farm and like going out to do whatever task she feels like doing and then switching it up if she needs to because she's just not interested in doing that works well for her. And I think it's the same level of what Sage is talking about. And then just, trying to relate this back to some of the stuff we talked about in this episode. Me saying that I can't even fathom going to work in an office every day where I have to socialize all day long, or the potential of socialization all day long would cause me so much anxiety that I wouldn't get anything done because I would be nervous that somebody's going to try and have a conversation with me and I'm not prepared for that conversation. And 2, being in uncomfortable clothing, like clothing that doesn't feel comfy on my skin, that's all I can think about. Like I wouldn't be able to focus on whatever task I need to do. Like I need to wear clothing and be under a blanket and have my feet tucked up or else I can't focus. Like it just doesn't happen.
Right. I mean, one of the main things that I enjoy about homesteading especially homesteading by myself, is that whenever I go to do something, I mean, yeah, I have some things that are more priority than others, but speaking broadly, I can look at the list of 100 different possibilities of what I do, and I just go pick the one that I want to do, right? I don't have anyone else depending on me. I haven't like made promises to somebody that I've committed to do this thing, and oh gosh, now I have to do it, and like the anxiety that builds up just thinking about that scenario is really kind of wild. And so I get to look at that list and I get to say, where does my dopamine lie today? It lies with this task. Great. I'm gonna go do that. And then yeah, like Lindsay, I might run out of steam in the middle of that task. And whereas in certain social situations or at work, I wouldn't have the freedom to just say, whatever, I'm gonna leave this quarter of the way done and go pick up this other thing. I get to do that with homesteading, and it's very freeing, it's very regulating for me to be able to do that, because in every other aspect of my life, and for as long as I have lived to this point, if I were to do that and people were to observe that, they would be like, "What's wrong with you? You can't just do that. You have to finish it. That's how it works. That's how this works." But that's not how I work, and that's probably never going to be how I work. And if I don't find an outlet for myself to be able to do that, I will, I don't say this colloquially, I will lose my mind. I will go a little bit crazy.
I thought of another example that also ties back to a comment we've gotten. Things that you guys probably see, but you don't realize that it's this factor of our lives showing up, is when one of us is talking. If you're watching the YouTube video, watch our faces. Don't watch them too closely, just as a case study. I have to tell myself to respond visually, like make facial expressions to make sure I'm seeming interested in something, because I am genuinely interested in what Sage is saying. But my face doesn't read that way. Like, it will just zone out and I will look like I'm not paying attention if I'm not actively telling myself, you should smile now. Nod your head. And I don't think that that's a like a neurotypical response to like conversation, but I think that's a very widely accepted thing in like neurodivergent people, that like in order to engage with people you have to like actively be thinking about the entire thing, and social, like different cues that are happening, tone, like you're picking up on a lot of subtle things that other people don't pick up on. And I think that's why social interactions exhaust me personally so much.
Yeah, we've gotten a comment here. Someone commented about my face while I was listening to you talk about your week, and I had my arms crossed and I wasn't actively smiling. I don't know.
You're just
I thought I
listening.
looked normal. But yeah, I mean that's kind of that off-putting thing that we talk about with masking. When we record this podcast, we sit down at the end of the day, which for Mickayla and I, we've been expending all of this energy, all of this executive functioning, all of this dopamine all day. And then we sit down, and especially me, I don't always have the energy to sit here and think about, calculating what exactly the right degree of smile is so that I don't look like I'm on something, but I also don't look pissed. And I also know that Mickayla's not going to take it that way, because one of the reasons that we're very comfortable with each other is that we speak that same neurodivergent language. That's also one of the ways that I figured out that I fit under that umbrella. So I was like, every single person that I am good friends with, that I get along with, has this thing. Maybe that says something about me. But also, before I derail myself and forget what I was actually talking about, um, for me, if I am constantly focusing on what my body language is saying, what my facial expressions are saying, it's then really hard for me to actually listen to the person. So I can either look like I'm listening, or I can listen. And if I am particularly fatigued, like at the end of the day, I'm not always capable of doing both. I sometimes have days where I can mask great and no one would have any idea. And then I also have days where I am exhausted or dysregulated for some other reason. And then it comes out more and it's it's a lot more obvious.
Yeah, I mean, we usually talk for like an hour before each episode, half hour to an hour, where we're just like venting and preparing ourselves to have to talk on a recorded video session. Like,
Yeah.
these podcasts are twice as long as they actually end up being because we have to mentally prepare ourselves and like hype each other up to be able to talk on camera. And that's a lot. I know we've been talking about work and life and homestead balance, but a lot of the times we're also balancing neurodivergence, but also YouTube and also podcasts and whatever else is happening, social stuff that like really just takes a toll on you. And so I don't know. I'm really hoping that this conversation in totality, like all of it, can resonate with people, but especially this last part, like we've never really fully addressed that. And I think that it's an important key piece of trying to find some semblance of balance or integration or the sacrifice, whatever we wanted to call it, because it's definitely like a huge part of it. It's a huge deal.
And honestly, if you are one of our listeners who listens all the time, if you can keep up with our brains, if you enjoy this flow of conversation, you might be under that umbrella too. And one last thought or question that I want to talk about before we end this is I'm curious if since you've started homesteading, you're a couple years into this now, do you feel like you are making progress in striking a better balance between all of these things? Or do you feel like it's just kind of that way and it's going to be that way no matter what?
I think in the overall like entirety of my life and I guess adult life and my time homesteading, like full on being on this property, I would say yes. Like to both of those things, I am definitely getting better at finding that balance and allowing myself more of the life aspect of that instead of just constantly working on work or homestead or YouTube or podcast or whatever. I've definitely in the last 6 months, I would say, started to get better at that. And I think that's a matter of a whole bunch of factors. Part of it being like my body just said it's time to focus on me and like didn't let me ignore it much longer. And also like getting into my late 20s now, like things, I feel like life, that's just how life flows. Like you start to get a little less chaotic if you let yourself, like as time goes on. I feel like early 20s, like when you're in college, especially architecture school, and like getting your first job, and like we've been moving all around the country and then renovating this house and everything, like, and then we lived through COVID and like my 20s and life before now has just been absolute chaos. And I feel like we're getting to a point finally where we're like almost to our 30s and life can kind of just flow a little bit better now. And I'm really looking forward to the next few years of like actually leaning into being able to rest a little bit more. Do you feel like it's been a similar like leaning into that flow for you now that you've been there for a few years, or has it just gotten more chaotic?
I feel like I have a better balance than when I first moved here, but I also feel like I'm nowhere close to the degree of balance that I thought that I would have, going into my 4th season. Yeah, I envisioned a world in which, my house was relatively tidy and the garden was relatively weed-free and the animals are taken care of. I was like, I'm so used to doing hard stuff all the time. Again, I live my life on hard mode. Like, how hard could this be? Yeah, it's hard. It really is. But the homesteading stuff is the hard that I enjoy, and I think that every year that I do this, I realize what I enjoy more, and I'm able to draw back on some of the things that maybe just aren't worth it to me, and I get to reinvest in those things that are. And I ended up having a little bit more energy. And again, building a homestead is so different than maintaining a homestead. But building a homestead just takes a really long time. So I feel like progress has been made. I also feel like there's a whole lot more progress that could be made. And I'm also okay with being a little chaotic if that means that I get to do the things in life that make life worth living to me.
A little bit of chaos is worth it for not having to settle in the long run.
I agree with that.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of She Said Homestead. We hope you enjoyed our chat. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Send your homesteading stories to us at shesaidhomestead@gmail.com. We can't wait to share them on the air. To stay connected, follow us on Instagram for updates and sneak peeks at what's coming up next.
If you like video podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the She Said Homestead YouTube channel too. We can't thank you enough for being part of the She Said Homestead community. Until next time, happy homesteading.